Good evening, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Gessel, and I'm the Director of Public Programs here at Museum of the African Diaspora. And I want to welcome you all here this evening. We're thrilled to be presenting this program, Blues in the City, with Marcus Shelby. It's part of a series. This is the second part. And as we begin all of our programs, we like to ground ourselves in the spaces we are occupying. As many of us are settlers, immigrants, or descendants of those forcibly brought to this continent, our institutions were founded upon the exclusions and erasures of the indigenous people on whose land we are located. Moad occupies the unceded land of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples, and we pay our respects to the Ohlone peoples and their elders, both past and present, who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. I'd also like to point out the small slips of paper that are on your seat that have a QR code on it. That's for a program survey. You can scan that and take a little quick survey to give us feedback about the program. It's really helpful for MOAD and for our partner, Yerba Buena Gardens Festival, to get this kind of feedback. And if the technology is too much for you, I will help you after the program. So very grateful to be in partnership with Yerba Buena Gardens Festival on this program and series. And I will now turn it over to Christina Ibarra to tell you more about tonight's program.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Can we give it up for Elizabeth and for Moad? We love partnering with Moad, and we want to give our deepest thanks to them. This is one of many events that we co-host with them every year, and they're just the superest partner. And if you haven't checked out their galleries, please find out more about what they have on exhibit here. We also want to thank the California Arts Council and the California Humanities, a nonprofit partner of the National Endowment for the Humanities, for their support of this program. Without them, we would not be able to host these beautiful events, so many, many thanks to them. Yerba Buena Gardens Festival is an independent nonprofit organization that programs all the outdoor spaces at the gardens. And just out of curiosity, has anyone been to our programs outdoors? Oh, we have some friends in the audience. Very nice. Is anyone has never been there? Well, welcome. We have some calendars on your seats. You can see what's coming up in the next couple months. We have programs all the way throughout October, and they range from music to dance to children's programs to poetry to circus to pretty much everything that you can imagine. They're always free, they're always outdoors, and they're always featuring incredible artists. And tonight is a bit of a special program as we are indoors, but it's no less part of our mission to support incredible artists such as Marcus Shelby. Let's give it up for Marcus Shelby. Marcus probably needs very little introduction to those of you that are in this room, but if in case this is your first encounter, Marcus Shelby is a band leader, composer, bassist, educator, and all-around badass, if I may say so, who's currently the artistic director of Healdsburg Jazz. Yes, we can give it up for Healdsburg Jazz. A past resident artist of the San Francisco Jazz Festival and the Healdsburg Jazz Festival, and has been a longtime resident artist of the Yerba Buena Gardens Festival. We've been blessed and honored to work with him for over a decade with many, many original compositions. And tonight you'll hear more about the upcoming composition that will be premiered at the Yerba Buena Gardens Festival, all free and all outdoors, on September 3rd. We're very excited to hear more as part of this lecture series. And Marcus, if I read all of your accolades, we would be here all night. So I'll just give it up and ask you all to give it up for Marcus Shelby.
Alrighty. I want to thank y'all for coming out. I want to give a lot of thanks to Yerba Buena Gardens Festival. It's been my family for the last, like over 10 years. 10 years doing programming together and using art and music, at least in my case, to address current issues, past issues, present issues, avoid future issues, or at least have a creative way of understanding and dealing with future issues. And so I've been thankful because they've helped me do a lot of different projects around a lot of things that have particularly been challenging to the Black community that I come out of, our local community, another community that I come out of. I've been in San Francisco now for 26 years. Came up from Los Angeles, and so lucky to have fallen into the hands of Intersection for the Arts and given these opportunities. I want to thank the California Humanities as well, who are a big supporter of this work. And of course, MOAD. I want to thank MOAD, where we've done a lot of these type of collaborations before in developing pieces, music, and having a place to talk about it, a place to develop it, a place to bring other voices to the table. Sometimes they don't agree, which is always good, I believe, when you have a place to sort of debate in a healthy way and try to figure things out. And for me, it's always been sort of how Nina Simone approached work. She has a famous quote about the duty of an artist is to reflect the times for which they live. And just like it was in the 60s for her, so is the case for us today. And it covers a lot of different challenges, notwithstanding the pandemic that we are still in and have been now for over 2.5 years. And so really that's kind of the birth of this whole thing, is trying to understand what happened over the last 2.5 years. Not so much what started, but how it affected not only our community, but in particular those who are unhoused. And so I started actually reading about this, trying to understand it in some way before the pandemic started. Just reading about the unhoused in our city, which has been always a problem since I've been here. There's been all kinds of solutions that have been tried. Mayors have won campaigns based on their promise to fix the so-called homeless problem. It's only gotten worse and worse and worse, because how can you fix something that is inherently broke? It's like trying in some cases to fix policing when it's tied so much to slavery and where it was born. And so until you make real fundamental changes, some advocated by the great Angela Davis when it comes to prison abolition, making real structural changes, ending the sort of colonial mentality, which is we're going to talk about a lot because it's in the book that inspired me so much in this piece. Until those changes are made, it just repeats itself over and over. And then when a pandemic comes along, it exasperates. And that's exactly what happened. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. And for me, music is a way of understanding these issues, because it forces you to read about them, forces you to ask questions, and forces you to seek guidance. I was lucky to work with Eva Patterson, who ran the Equal Justice Society for over 20 years as one of the advisors on this project, and trying to understand how systematic racism plays a role in just about everything that we do in this society, from the military-industrial complex to the pharmaceutical-industrial complex to the military-industrial complex, the prison-industrial complex, and how that's all tied to our economy and how that keeps a certain class in power. And so she helped us unpack that, and then we had to do that online. And the first thing that we're going to do is I'm going to invite, it's actually the second thing because I'd already talked a little bit. I'd like to invite up the ensemble that I'm working with in creating music and sketches that will sort of be the moods and sort of the character that sits on top of all of this research. So I'm going to bring them up one at a time. Start with this young trumpet player right here. Please welcome Aaron Smith. Aaron's out of Sacramento, where I'm out of. I went to high school in Sacramento. I'm a little bit older than Aaron, so we kind of missed each other. But that's where I started, and I've been hearing about this young man now for several years, and so happy that I could call him to be a part of this work. Also want to bring up our percussionist, Rebecca Rodriguez. Rebecca's an amazing musician and plays in her own groups, and I think he went to San Francisco State, studied with one of our colleagues, John Calloway, so very happy to be playing with her. This young man on Vibes is someone who I met probably 8 years ago or so, and we've been playing off and on, and he's a great drummer, a great vibes player, and he can, I know he went to the jazz school, but where else did you go?
I went to West Valley.
West Valley.
Yeah.
So he's a learned musician, but an incredible soulful one. That's Dylan Votto on Vibes. I want to introduce our keyboard player. We've been playing together now. We started playing before the pandemic. Matter of fact, our last gig was in San Jose when they said time to lock down. And we even during the pandemic made a number of videos, as everybody did, for the only way that we could perform. And that's Luis Peralta on piano. And then last but not least is my sister, who is actually our artist in residence at Healdsburg, and I couldn't be more proud than to have her represent our festival, our organization, and someone we've known each other for almost 20 years, colleagues. We teach together, we play together, and we activate together. And check out her work online. She's working with the Oakland Symphony, the San Francisco Symphony, the Oakland East Bay Symphony, Healdsburg Jazz, San Francisco Jazz. She works with our kids in schools. And that's Destiny Muhammad on harp. So we're just gonna play one first. You know, the title of this program is really a working title. It's not the actual title. Sometimes you don't get the title until you finish a piece, because you hope that through the process you've learned something. And something, you know, often I'll start with a big idea, and then once you get into the research, it becomes more refined, and you might zero in on something very personal. But I always come from the aesthetic of the blues, which is the black aesthetic, which comes from not the style blues music, which is just one of the fruits hanging on the tree of Black American music. But the blues as a fundamental way of communicating. Field shouts, work songs, blues shouts, complaint calls, spirituals, work songs. All of this is the language of the blues, born out of my ancestors, out of survival. Matter of fact, to me, blues is really, there's two ways to define it. One simple way is the pursuit of freedom, which ties so much to our story. Because every blues musician, whether they play the harp or sing or piano bass, they're aiming for musical freedom. Freedom of harmony, freedom of rhythm, freedom of melody, in their own interpretive way. And that's why that's why we like this music. It gives you that sort of individual freedom. And it's ironic, but not surprising that it's tied to the freedom of black people who invented the blues. And when you look at that, that is the root of all the music in this country, all of it. That's born in this country. Rock and roll, hip hop and soul, funk, gospel has this DNA attached to it. So when I use the blues, it's really language, in some cases, language of freedom. There's another form of blues, another definition would be tension and release. Harmonic tension, you hear about, those blue notes in the chord, that creates tension. But it's not so much that it stays there, It's how it resolves, which is the sort of duality of life and the human condition. It's that happy face and it's that sad face, the sort of tragedy and triumph that we all experience and that we all will experience, no matter who you are, no matter where you come from. And this invention, the blues, an incredible invention. You know, this country has really produced so-called 3 innovations that we've given the world. Some say the Constitution, some say baseball. I say baseball. And then the blues. A lot of people say, oh, jazz. Well, no, not jazz. Jazz is another fruit on the tree that was has the DNA of the blues. And so those 3 things, in particular, the story of black people in this country. And so I call it Blues in the City because there's a lot of different things that interest me in the moment, in particularly the plight of the unhoused. And over the last 2.5 years, there's been all kinds of ways that we physically see that. You take a stroll down to the Tenderloin, you physically see it. You know, you see if you've been in this city for 2 decades like I have, over 2 decades, some more, I know, but for me, when I first came here, I stayed in a hotel in the Tenderloin. I was there for 6 months. And it doesn't look anything like it looks now, which is the physical manifestation of systemic racism, of white supremacy, and how it has infected all these ways that priorities have been blurred on how we take care of those who are lesser than us. Colonialism, all of these roots that add up to inequality, injustice, over-incarceration, and all these ills that we currently face, and now more than before. So we're going to begin. We're just going to play a piece that's kind of inspired. I was in the Tenderloin over the last 6 months, recording with the great Denise Perrier, who just passed away about 6 months ago. So one of her final recordings we did was down at the Hyde Street studio, which is right smack dab in the Tenderloin. I looked around, I was like, oh my God, you know? Oh my God, because it had tripled, quadrupled over the pandemic. Encampments, young people living on the streets, all races, not just black, all races. Probably the commonality were all poor. You know, we're going to play a piece just to kind of open up. We just call this Tenderloin. Y'all done got quiet. We haven't been in front of people. I mean, we have been playing, but to have this sort of talk back, it's been a minute. It's been a minute. Just sort of being able to connect. So, oh, sorry. I'm going to turn on we're going to start with a quote by the Dr. Martin Luther King, and then talking about poverty in America. Here we go.
Who knows me knows that I'm committed to nonviolence, and I still believe that nonviolence is the most potent weapon available to the Negro in his struggle for freedom and justice. But it is not enough for me to say that. It is not enough for one to stand up and condemn a riot.
Calvin Reed, Furman Vincent Valenzuela, Hector Ariola, Cristobal Solano, Vincent Villela, Carlos Ingram Lopez, Robert Richardson, Rodney Brown, David Manassian, Marshall Miles, James Perry, Craig McInnes,
India Cummings,
Daniel
Eleanor
Lenz
Northington,
Bigler,
Javier Amblier,
Manuel
Eric
Ellis,
Scott,
Justin
Ben
Thompson,
Linsmeyer,
Matthew Ajibade, Ben
Diamond
Anthony
Ross,
C. Baca,
Christopher,
Lashano All Gilbert,
Juan,
Jack Martin, Frank Smart,
Zachary,
Luis
Bear
Rodriguez,
Alejandro
Hernan
Cortez,
Jaramillo,
Mohammed
Elijah McLean, Byron Williams,
Andrew Carson,
Rakeem Rux,
Schnell,
Branch Roth,
Thomas Purdy,
Eric Garner,
Troy,
James W. Brown,
Terrell Ellis Jr.,
William Ray
Miguel
Banks,
Ramirez,
Valentine
Bebeto
Minbeku,
Gutierrez,
Calvin Reed,
Barbara
Furman
Dawson,
Vincent
Jonathan
Valenzuela,
Sanders,
Hector
Roy
Ariello,
Nelson Jr.,
Cristobal Solano,
Robert Minjares,
Vincent Valela,
Freddie Gray,
Carlos Ingram
Michael
Lopez,
Saki,
Robert
John
Richardson,
Gleason,
Rodney Brown,
Francisco
David
Simon,
Manassian, Marshall
Kenneth
Miles,
Lucas,
James
Anthony
Perry,
Perkins, Louis Solano,
Alicia Thomas, Casey Balbert, Nathan Prasad, Rodney Brown, George Floyd, John Neville, Trayvon Martin, Sandra Bland, Alex Nieto, Oscar Grant.
I Can't Breathe. This is how we're going to talk about a really wonderful book today, Inflamed, written by my dear friend I'm about to bring up in a second. And she begins one of her chapters speaking these names before she goes into the writing. And to me, it was almost like a canon of names that maybe we recognize some of them, maybe we don't. But these are real people who met, in some cases, I think in all the cases, the ultimate injustice. When we think about some of the stories that have happened, some over the last year, some during the pandemic, some over the last 10 years, like right here in the Bay Area with Oscar Grant and Alex Nieto. And so I'd like to actually at this time bring up my dear friend who's a medical doctor, a musician, a very talented musician. And you know, we both been in this city for over 20 years. And we, you know, I like to think that we all kind of came out of the same music movement. In some cases maybe spearheaded by the music of Michael Franti, the writings of Rebecca Solnit, Angela Davis, and how art has that supreme quality of reaching people, bringing people together, but also being in the movement led by people like Michael Franti. There is a joy in the struggle with the music that unites us all, that harkens themes, that speaks to what's happening today based on our ancestors and what they did to fight and to march, whether it was for occupying Wall Street, whether it was for fighting for the 4 brothers who went on a hunger strike, whether it's fighting for the sort of justice for Alex Nieto, all of these things specific here. We kind of came out of that movement together. I'm very proud because she continues on in her medical work, fighting against racial and medical racism. And she wrote this great book with Raj Patel called Inflamed. And we're going to talk about this book. But before we do that, can we get a chair out here for Rupa? Please welcome to the bandstand, Rupa Marya, my dear friend. Genius, activist, expert.
I don't know about that.
Oh, I know about all of that. You know, we only got the time that we have, but we'll make the most of it because we could talk forever, How you doing?
I'm doing okay. I'm going to leave my mask on just because our case positivity rate in San Francisco is about 14%, and I take that number pretty seriously.
Oh my God.
I've had COVID twice, and it's not pretty, and so I don't want to get it again.
We don't want that to happen.
No, thank you.
So, Rupa, we met, 20 years ago, I think it was, or something like that. The whole Cafe Revolution scene, Amnesia, Bruno's, and I think right away we kind of had, right away I think we found simpatico in using music as a way to kind of raise issues that were sometimes very local, sometimes national, sometimes international. But I just want to kind of, because I know you really well. I know you as a musician, and I know you as a doctor. And what do you call yourself?
I call myself a mom. I'm a healer.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a lover of humanity.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a decolonizer.
Mm-hmm.
Working on our collective liberation. So I'm all those things. But right now I'm also just so grateful to hear your beautiful music, all of you. That felt so good to my body. It's been so long since I've heard you play, Marcus, and it felt so good to listen to all that and feel all that vibration just right here in this room with all of you.
Well, thank you. Thank you. It feels good to us too. And this is a very new ensemble. Some of my musicians I played with, like Dylan and Luis and Destiny, but some of the musicians I just started playing with, and a lot of it has to do with just the last 2 years have felt like, and Destiny, I'm gonna borrow this from you, texture, tones, and so that's why you have harp and vibraphone and percussion, which are 3 instruments I haven't typically had, because that's how the last 2.5 years have felt.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about a little bit going forward. How did you get through the last 2.5 years?
Well, I wish I could say it was by playing music, but honestly, my heart has been so saddened by what I've witnessed on the front line as a doctor in San Francisco. I work at UCSF. My heart has been so broken by witnessing people unhoused in the streets and Mayor Breed blocking their admission into the hotels when there were 30,000 vacant hotel rooms and a unanimous board of supervisors vote to get everyone inside. And I'm like, well, what will it take? Oh, surely when the air quality is so crappy that it's hazardous for human health and we have a Delta wave, a surge, now everyone will get in. And it didn't happen. And so to see that sacrifice zone here in San Francisco, who's being sacrificed? The poor, the brown, the black, the indigenous. And to see that callousness of racial capitalism played out today, here, right now. And then to be in the hospital forced to sign discharge orders so that people cannot get a safe place to leave when they're leaving the hospital. So I'm discharging elders to the streets in the midst of the fires, in the midst of the virus. So to me, I'm an empath, and my music comes from that place, and it's just been so crushed. And so music for me has been, when my father died when I was 26, I was actually quiet for 3 years. And I feel like I'm in another one of those deep, like mourning quiets. And then when I came out of that quiet, I met you. And that's when I wrote like 40 songs in 6 months. And it was just like, okay, we're playing all the time. But that right now, I'm not shocked because I knew it. I knew that we live in an era of colonial violence and that black, brown, and indigenous people, poor people, are sacrificed. I know that.
Mhm.
But to see it again and again on a daily, when I'm surrounded by people in institutions that say they're there to serve and help and all this. So you really get to see the violence of liberalism, San Francisco liberalism, which I have no patience for anymore, because it's really time to get radical and act,
Oh.
and that in order to protect people's dignity and their health. And so that's something that, it's not really a time for music for me. It's a time for growing food and stoking the flame a little bit.
Yeah, thank you.
But I need the music. So I'm here.
Well, for those that don't know, I mean, Rupa traveled the world. She had her band Rupa and Rupa and the April Fishes, and we're talking about all over the world for several years, 10 years. Yeah, I mean, Europe, North of, South America, just on the road playing her music that she wrote. So when I say she was a musician, she was of the very highest quality musician, writing music and fronting a band as a band leader, which comes out of the old tradition of Bessie Smith and Ma Rainey and how they ran their bands. They were the first major band leaders coming out of this black music called the blues. And Rupa carried that tradition very well. And I was going to kind of wait to jump into your book, but it's so hard because everything you're talking about now is in your book. You mentioned racial, what you call racialized medicine, or racial capitalism. Can you just explain a little bit of that, racial capitalism?
Well, this is this is the way the society is organized. It's the way in which hierarchies have been maintained through the dominance of Europe around the world, in order to steal people's lands and subjugate their labor, and to extract from those colonized places back to the colonial metropole. And so we're living with this architecture that none of us here decided to be a part of, but now we're all participating in. And every day that we allow this architecture to continue, we are tacitly accepting and participating in the structures of violence around us. And so what I did in our book was look at, with Raj Patel, who's just an incredible thinker and economist and food systems activist, was what toll does that take on our bodies? And this work really sprung out of years, 15 years on the road with the band. Because I'd be in the hospital working as a physician, and then I'd grab my guitar and put down my stethoscope and head out on the road with my band. And when I loved touring festivals, and we played these big festivals around the world, what I really enjoyed was going out into the street and into the anarchist squats and into these places where you could meet people at society's edges and understand who was getting sick and how they were getting sick and who was healthy and how they were healthy. And when you travel with a guitar, as opposed to your stethoscope and your clipboard, the kind of research you get is very different. So people would just let the band into the home and into the community, and then we were sitting and talking and listening, and that kind of double exchange that happens musically. That doesn't happen through scientific inquiry. That doesn't happen through doing a research study. Showed me the kinds of insights that we brought forward in the book. That racism is a form of biological warfare. That structures around our body that structure oppression are causing our immune systems to self-destruct through the expression of chronic illness, through the expression of chronic inflammatory disease. So when we look at why, Black, brown, poor, indigenous people have higher rates of diabetes and Alzheimer's and cancer and all of these things, these diseases are all, we know now, are chronic inflammatory diseases. COVID, severe COVID, is a manifestation of inflammation. And so the body, the immune system is being tuned by the structures around the body to express itself in a certain way. So what's so exciting about this is that if you change those structures to be caring, to be supportive, the immune system will harmonize to those external structures. So we are choosing the outcomes of poor health for certain people, and we are choosing the outcomes of better health for other people. But if we can structure a world differently, which we can, We just have to overcome our lack of action and the political vicissitudes we see even here in San Francisco. We can actually create something that our bodies will harmonize to better. And that, to me, is the tremendous possibility that we outlined in our book, Inflamed.
And I would highly recommend y'all get this book. It's, I'm not a doctor, I'm not in the medical, and but I learned a lot of just the relationship between physiology, sociology, and the intentionality of how all of that has been sort of throughout time controlled by dominant culture. I'm gonna. What I like about your book is it reminds me of like you begin with several quotes. Sometimes it's James Baldwin, Nikki Giovanni, because then that took me on a whole nother road to go and research this very incredible conversation that they had in 1971, being very frank about race in 1971 and what happened in the 60s. And I guarantee you, if you didn't know it was 71, you think they were talking about 2021, like right now, because many of the things that they mentioned are very much relatable to today. So I'm going to play, because I got the actual recording of, of Nikki Giovanni and James Baldwin, and this is how you open up your chapter called Connective Tissue, which I think is a really important chapter. And they're all important, but this one hit me essentially really hard because there's some musical analysis in there, which I like because I'm a nerd.
And because he's quoted.
Yeah. Nicholas Payton quoted Wynton Marsalis, and these are two people who I follow. So y'all forgive my Bluetooth device is going to say, Marcus's iPhone, now connected. Just ignore that. And I'm going to play this clip. And then I want you to
Marcus's iPhone
see,
connected.
See, I don't know. I just don't really have an answer for all of that yet. I'm just doing this off, kind of raw. But here's, we're going to start off with this quote, and then I'm going to ask you a couple questions. Ability to love. Okay.
I would speak only for myself, really. I know that in my own case, what I felt and still feel, perhaps in a different way, but I felt very strongly in the years, for example, when we all were marching down the dusty highways in Martin. Look, I left the church when I was 17 years old, and I've not really been to a church since, except when I had to go for various fundraising rallies or this or that. And I was not exactly the kind of Christian that Martin was, in fact, if you described as Christian at all.
It's hard to be the kind of Christian you
But I liked him, I loved him, in fact, and I knew that something was happening through him. And my concern was, yes, the world. But I'd seen what white people had done to the world. And I'd seen what white people had done to their children. Because again, in the world, they had lost something. They lost the ability to love their own children.
Or the ability to love themselves.
Which is the same thing, And I don't want that to happen, if I may say so, to you.
Now, why did you start the chapter with that quote?
Oh man, that was it was heavy to hear there, his voice say that. In the book, we really look at the history of thought that led to European conquest of almost the entire civilized world, of the entire world. There are very few places that were untouched by European colonization. And the impact of those thoughts that came from Europe created systems of domination and extraction and ecological destruction everywhere they went. So we are living today with these record-breaking temperatures, with this architecture of thought that was exported from Europe. And we have inherited it. So now you look at India with its fascist Modi and that government, and it's not like you got to be white to be a colonist. You can see that in San Francisco very clearly. That it's the colonial capitalist cosmology that we really take aim at. And what happened to people when they severed their critical relationships to one another and to our duties to the web of life that actually supports our health. What happened when we all agreed to do that somehow, and where did that start? And so we go back to the dawn of colonial capitalism and the need for Europe to subjugate its own women first, to remove them from the commons, to remove them from their place of holding medicine knowledge, to remove them from their roles as midwives and the keepers of women's medicine, and to stick them in the house, the creation of the modern household, the nuclear family. Every man was a king in his own castle. This axis of domination of, cis hetero patriarchy. So these things, the erasure of the complexities of gender, the erasures of women's power, which we're seeing again and again. These are parts of a system of colonial domination. It had to happen at home first before it went to Ireland, before it went to the west coast of Africa, before it went to India, before it went around the world. And so to understand that severance of duty, our sacred duty to one another in our humanity, to take care of each other, to look at each other as relatives, to look at the plants as relatives, to look at the web of life around us as something that is necessary of our care. That is something that, that severance of care is something that I was very interested in, because what we have found in our research, Raj and I, is that those societies that live still with intact duties of care to the web of life and to the kin around them, to maintain kinship, do not have chronic inflammatory disease the way modern industrialized societies do. I recently spoke with a Warani indigenous activist, Namonte Nkemo, from the Amazon. She is from Ecuador. She was back in this area. We met on land that we are helping to return to Ramaytush people down the coast of what's called now San Gregorio. We have a farm that we're working on to liberate food to bring up here to the city to feed the people. And our indigenous elders met together with Namonte, who said she's from a group of people who went deep. They're part of the uncontacted people in the Amazon. So when COVID hit, they all went deep. They went deep into the jungle like they did when polio hit. And she said of the 2,500 community members that were there who all got sick 3 times, not one person died. And that's unusual. And they were old people and young people. Not one person died from COVID in her community so far. The people who were Warani who did die were people who were living in the villages with the petroleum workers. They were people who were living outside of that worldview that necessitate certain obligations of care. And so that's what I was really interested in. How does care actually create interactions with ourselves, create the possibility for health, not just of an individual. It's not about me just doing my Om mantras and yoga and like the holistic narcissistic version of healing we see here in California, but the care of our communities, so that we all get together and take over those damn hotels, so that our unhoused relatives are not sitting in these undignified situations on the street. So we demand that people get the care that they need, mental health services and food that they need, so that they can take care of themselves, and so we can see different health outcomes. So this to me was really interesting, was really starting to look at what are the obligations of care and when did that get severed? And then how have we lived with it? And I look at our Native American friends who are finding tens of thousands of children buried in these schools, these residential schools. So when white people lost the ability to love their own children during the Victorian era, children are better seen, not heard. So the the power of a child's voice is muted at a time where the world is being colonized, and that children were also, these savages were likened to just innocent children, right? So their voices were robbed. And at that same time, children were being taken from the homes of black and brown communities and literally killed and buried in the schoolyard. So this is part of a system of thought that we have to look at very carefully. And there are people in this country who don't want you to read the history, who want to carry on like we were civilized, they were savage, this is how this went down. But this is an important time to reckon with that history so that we can understand, why does everyone have diabetes? Why is inflammatory bowel disease going through the roof? Why are people getting cancer who are 35 years old? I just helped a young man die of colon cancer, 35 years old, and it's not the first one at UCSF. And so what's going on, everybody? And so it's an important time for us to wake up, because our health is not just our individual health, but our collective health requires our collective care. And so that's where that starts.
And you talk about that. That's so beautiful. You talk about that in your chapter, Deep Medicine. I think you call it a culture of care. Culture of care. We're going to play two pieces, but before we play that, because we're going to play a piece called Variation on a Variant, which is sort of self-explanatory as we go through these different variants, Delta, Omicron, whatever it is right now, whatever it will be in 6 months, and whatever it will be after that, variation and how it affects. In your book, you talk about how COVID hurt BIPOC communities more than others. And you talk about how COVID, why it was much more dangerous and much more contagious in nursing homes, in prisons, in black neighborhoods. So, and you talk about something that I know we've talked about in the past before. It has to do with this overly incarcerated a nation that we live in. Still, even with the advances that have happened over the last several years of trying to bring the prison population down, it's still a healthy part of our economy in so many different ways. And this is what Angela Davis calls the prison industrial complex, how so many industries, their bottom lines are tied to how many people are locked up, whether it's private prisons, whether it's the technology of prisons. And certainly COVID exacerbated that, and we know that, I think in your book you mentioned 1 out of 5 people who were incarcerated were infected. Can you talk a little bit about this?
Yeah, so COVID spreads in places of incarceration. So we've incarcerated our elders. We've warehoused our elders. We stick our kids in little boxes and we drop them off and leave them, so that we can go and create money for this system to run. Meat packing workers, farm workers, the worst paid jobs in the United States, most of them held by our relatives from the South, were COVID spread rampantly. Here in San Francisco, the Latino population was particularly hit hard by COVID. A lot of places where people did not have adequate access to enough space in their housing to be able to properly socially distance. So COVID spaces moves and moves around in places where people are stuck together and can't move. And those places are disproportionately black and brown places. And poor places. So people who are really wealthy can hire help to keep their elderly people at home so they can age at home. We should all be able to keep our elders at home, but we don't. We don't prioritize that as a society. We should all be able to keep our children home or in an outdoor space to be educated while this virus spreads, but we don't. We don't prioritize that. And so what COVID did was really expose these fault lines of all these decisions that we have made or haven't made or have just let be made by this system that necessitates that working class people get the fuck to work. And that's when I saw it, when it was we're in the midst of a surge and we're telling all the kids to go back and take their masks off, people at UCSF saying it's time to take your mask off. Are we just trying to get everybody infected? What's going on? Like, what's going on? And you know whose kids were out there the most vulnerable to getting the inflammatory conditions were the kids who were coming from families that were chronically socially oppressed. And so that, to me, those are the fault lines that we've seen. Now, what are we going to do about it? And what we're seeing here in San Francisco from Mayor Breed is we're going to do absolutely nothing about it but pay the cops a bigger budget. Because at a time where COVID is still active, communities still need food. 1 out of 4 people in San Francisco is food insecure. She put no more money in her budget for food funding. Actually, the food funding is getting cut in December. The police are getting 47, 48 million more. So it's like, are we going to police our way to a healthier population? Are we going to police our way to people not being thrown out into the streets? How is that going to work? And so to me, when I looked at the data on who was coming into the hospital, people who were coming in with severe COVID into the ICU, 67% of those people, so 2/3 of the people coming in to the hospital, hit the door, going to the ICU, are malnourished. So these are people who don't have access to healthy food. So if we want to do something to help reverse what we're seeing, we give people healthy food. We give people access, like no barrier access to the kinds of foods and shelter and places where their bodies can recover and heal. And that's going to require, since we're seeing that it's not the priority of people who are elected, that's going to require all of us getting a lot more pissed off and activated in the streets. It's not going to happen any other way. And if we can see what's happening from the top down in this country, the erosion of these kinds of things is going to start accelerating. So it's really critical that in San Francisco, in the Bay Area, that we do more to activate our population to take care of our most vulnerable people. Or I should say our people made most vulnerable by this system.
Thank you. Can we give Rupa a big round of applause? Picking it up. A lot of this is in our book too, so I'm just going to keep pushing that because this is a must read. We'll bring the ensemble back. We're going to play 2 pieces. One is called Variation on the Variant, and the other one is Behind Walls. And one is kind of self-explanatory. The other one, Behind Walls, really continues, is really inspired, or a comment on our over-incarcerated society, and also reimagining a system of justice that dealt with harms to the community, of which Angela Davis calls prison abolition. One of her great books is Are Prisons Obsolete? It's a short read that everyone should read. It speaks about, it precedes this whole sort of vision of defund and what that really means. I'm gonna start the piece off actually from a quote from Angela, and kind of clears up and clarifies what defund the police really means. There's a major misconception. Rupa talked a little bit about it right there, but here's Angela Davis on Democracy Now!
About shifting public funds to new services and new institutions, mental health counselors who can respond to people who are in crisis without arms. It's about shifting funding to education, to housing, to recreation. All of these things help to create security and safety. It's about learning that safety, safeguarded by violence, is not really safety. And I would say that abolition is not primarily a negative strategy. It's not primarily about dismantling, getting rid of, but it's about re-envisioning. It's about building anew. And I would argue that abolition is a feminist strategy, and one sees in these abolitionist demands that are emerging the pivotal influence of feminist theories and practices.
She's right about that, because much of the movement is led by women, feminists, who have, like they did at the beginning of the whole blues phenomena, where their voices were heard for the first time. Bessie Smith, Ma Rainey, Alberta Hunter, later on Billie Holiday. And blues music early was movement music. It exposed. Dr. Angela talks about this in her book, Blues, Legacies, and Black Feminism. And it ties to what she was speaking right there, to where we are today. So this piece is called Variation on Ovarian. Thank you. left, and I thought maybe we'd invite Dr. Rupa to come back up. And if y'all have any questions or comments or for Dr. Rupa or myself or the band, or this will be the time. We'll talk a little bit. We'll close on a quick one. But once again, on vibes, Dylan Votto, Rebecca Rodriguez, Aaron Smith on trumpet, Luis Peralta on the keyboard over here, and Destiny Muhammad. Destiny Muhammad.
And Marcus Shelby.
Yeah. we got time for a couple questions. Anybody have any questions they want to throw at us, or comments, or anything? Hey, Lou. None?
I got a question.
Oh, you got a question? Go ahead, Dylan.
Yeah. For you, Rupa, there's a number of ways in which I could name that are reasons for despair, growing on a daily freaking basis, right? And I wonder if you have any of your personal experience or thoughts with what regard do you allow yourself to kind of feel some of that, so that it's, there's impact and weight to it, but how do you balance that with moving forward? And it's lately, man, it's so hard for me to see an outcome in this country that isn't just complete regression, like hundreds of years, and like you said, the playbook is hundreds, it's thousands of years old at this point, right? But how do we not get overcome by that, but
Yes.
do something about it?
Yes, that's such an important question. So I've gotten involved in composting my grief collectively. So on the land that we're working to return to our Ramatish community, we are hosting with the indigenous elder, another healthcare practitioner, Sage LaPena, who's Noctipamwintu, California native indigenous plant medicine doctor, and any frontline healthcare worker who wants to come. Every month we do this thing called Heal the Healers. And so we do story medicine where we sit in a circle and we just go around and around, and we are speaking our stories to the seeds that we then go and plant in our fields. We ask our farmers, young Jabril Kaiser, incredible young farmer who started Black Rib Farms Collective. He's now working with us down the coast. He's from Sacramento too, and he was supposed to come tonight, so I'm so bummed that he's not here. But so that our farmers are working with us to help our healing. And then when we see those foods come up, and we know that we're giving them to our community, that we're liberating food and decommodifying it from the market economy to go to be what it's been in our histories, which is medicine for the people. That we're reestablishing those sacred relationalities to each other and to the plants and to the soil and to the water. That gives me tremendous hope. There's a 6,000 square foot barn down on that farm, and we're laying down a brand new wood floor next week so that we can invite you all to come and play this down there. Right? So when we bring music, we bring the food, we bring the communities, we bring people back together in a kind of relationality that is authentic and really motivated by our desire for creating a new culture, a culture of care, a culture that has never existed in this land since colonization, but has existed here for thousands of years before. So if you think of the last 250 years as a blip on the screen, compared to the thousands of years where we knew how to be with each other, we knew how to be on this earth in a good way, this is an aberration. This is a very deadly and horrific aberration. And so that quote by James Baldwin is like, how damaged do you have to be to do that damage to everything around you? So we have to work with our relatives of European ancestry to help them heal. They need to do some deep healing. And that's part of that work, is that we all need to find the places where we can move and shift the system and mobilize the privileges that we all walk with to deliberately change it in ways that can shift how aid moves, shift how mutual resources move. Like Angela Davis talks about, to defund certain things so we can fund other things. And so that's all that work gives me a lot of hope. And it's not like sunshine, it's not like Pollyanna, it's going to be easy. No, it's not. But when I work with the land, and I compost my grief in the land, and I listen to the land, and know what that land's been through, I feel a lot less alone in this. And I think it's in that collectivity, what you all just beautifully shared with us. You were awesome, by the way. I just loved hearing you just sit right in there with Marcus. It was awesome. When you hear that collectivity expressed, that's like the seed of hope.
Yes.
Because we can't actually unfuck this world alone. We actually have to do it all together. We have to mend that hoop that's been broken very intentionally so that power could be concentrated in very few hands. And so that is deep
It's
work.
almost part of the illusion, right? Is that it's trying to, like, the system is about rugged individualism, and the more it makes you think you're an individual, when you try to enact change, then you feel like you're actually alone.
Right.
When you're not.
And that's what's so beautiful about music, is that it's greater than the sum of all of you. So what we just heard here moved us in this way that none of them could have done alone. But when they put all their interlocking pieces together, it becomes something much bigger. And that's what we are. That's what we have forgotten. And so that gives me a lot. I am a diehard hopeful in the face of the most depressing time of my life. And I still go to bed every night praying and knowing like that the work that I am doing, the work that we must do, so that my children and my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren can live with healthy water and healthy food and healthy relationships. That has to start. And it started with all of the people who came before us, and it's something that we are being called to do, to take on that work today. And it's critical. So that gives me hope.
And you talk about that in your book. Oh, yeah, give it up, y'all. You talk about all of that in your book. This sort of, I mean, you brought up a good question that you do explain very well in the book. And, you know, we are pressed up against time, so we're gonna conclude, but we're gonna conclude on a piece where the title is actually inspired by something you write very eloquently in your book about ecotone. And it's so musical in its description, in its concept, but it's very practical too. Can you talk a little bit about ecotone? It's a word I've never heard before.
Yeah.
I read in your book.
Well, it's funny because the book was like such pain for me to write. I'm not a writer. It was this drudgery. Every morning I was up at 3 a.m. because I have young children, and I would like sit and read and write for the whole year. And when it came to writing about ecotones or ecotones, it was so musical to me. It was so easy to write about it. So these are spaces where two ecosystems come up against each other, not in a border, which is a manufactured reality, but in a boundary, in a fluid boundary. And so the ecotone of a river and a forest created by a beaver that ends up slowing the water and sinking it and making a wetland. So then you get this transition zone between the river, riparian corridor, and then the forest that creates more biodiversity. And so you get an acceleration of evolution in those places. You get more expressions of life happening in those places. You get a richer, more varied and more resilient biology in those places. And so the ecotones of, Marcus being in the mission when I was in the mission 20 years ago, so that we could run into each other and hear each other's music and allow it to shape how our music might change. It was really beautiful to see all of these artists in the same space interacting in and out of each other's homes and spaces. That richness is a place where more resiliency and more strength comes out of that beautiful diversity.
Thank you. Hey, can we hear it again for Rupa Marya? Rupa Marya. Get her book, Inflamed. Get her book, and you can get it at a local bookstore. So I think I got mine.
You can get it downstairs.
You get it downstairs. That's how local it is. I got mine in the Mission at Dog Ear. So definitely. And we're gonna conclude on this piece. It's not a long piece, it's a short piece. Called Ecotones or Ecotone. With this sort of idea of you give music purpose and meaning. That's what later Bernstein said in one of his famous speeches. And music is inspired in many ways. Sometimes it's very specific. Sometimes it's conceptual. But when you give it purpose and meaning, then it has purpose. You can use it for messaging, and you can use it to help change hearts and minds and develop unity. So we're going to close on this piece. We're going to feature our drummer on some of this, Rebecca. And thank y'all once again for coming out. We really appreciate it. Y'all gonna have to put up with my Marcus's iPhone just for a second. Sorry, I'm gonna have a better. Next time we do this, I'm gonna have a better system of playing pre-recorded tracks. But I do like the idea of pre-recorded tracks. It's almost like mixed media often when you're dealing with, and not just any tracks, but voices that are connected. Voices that almost sound like instruments themselves. James Baldwin, Angela Davis, Dr. King. There's others, Nikki Giovanni. But as we know, a lot of things happened during this this pandemic time. Some of it was social unrest. Some of it was, with the Black Lives Matter movement, and Dr. Rupa Marya talks about that in her book. And some of it had to do with something called an insurrection, which we're still debating and negotiating in the highest levels of government, like our eyes are lying to us, like we didn't all see it happen, right? I mean, but this is what systemic racism, white supremacy allows. I mean, any other group who would have conducted themselves in such, we would have had laws passed, we'd be at war with 5 or 6 other Muslim countries right now. There would have been all kinds of things put in place so that would never happen again. But that didn't happen, not in this country. Ironically,
I can only speak as what I am, but it's probably safer to speak.
Let me say this. James Baldwin talked about this 40 years ago.
And one of the strengths of the Afro-American, certainly the last 20, 30 years, is that we recognize we're not Americans. On one hand. On the other hand, we are the only true inheritors of the place called America.
That's right. It belongs to us.
Because we're still outside.
It belongs to us, and there's nobody can do anything about that.
And you look at it. And we continue to move. I think it's a gift.
In ways that one can't quite see yet. We already have it. That's one of the reasons for the panic.
We have to effect it.
Yes.
And we have to know it, and we have to make sure that everybody else.
We have to change it.
It's like the South lost the Civil War, but they didn't know it. Which is why they continued. Because someone finally said, you lost. And, didn't we? You know what I mean? They continued to act as if they had won.
Well, they still haven't lost it because that war was a kind of... The results of that war are being paid for until today.
And will be paid for.
When in March on Montgomery, Governor Wallace had the Confederate flag flying from the Capitol building, which is legally insurrection. But nobody said a word about it. Because, in fact, the South and North simply concluded a contract between them to keep you and me in slavery.
Yeah.
That's all that really happened. So the textile mills in Manchester and Massachusetts got rich, and the cotton fields got rich. Where the textiles come from, except Mississippi.
Thank you, Yerba Buena Gardens Festival. And one more time for Dr. Rupa Marya. Let's give it up for her. Okay, that's it, y'all. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for coming tonight. Thank you, Marcus. All of the musicians are incredible. Thank you. And thank you to Yerba Buena Gardens Festival. We do have the book downstairs in our bookstore, Inflamed, so purchase it. And Marcus will be back here on August 11th for the third part in the series. So come again, and please support MOAD and Yerba Buena Gardens Festival, and enjoy the rest of your night. Thank you.
Thank you.